Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we're looking at something pretty spectacular. This is the Oz Machine Company Roosevelt, a very popular and highly sought after folder that really is going to be nearly impossible to get a hold of. I know I have one and I'm saying that, but these are in very high demand. They're commanding quite a high price on the secondary market, and to get one directly from Oz Machine Company is a bit of a challenge these days. Apparently in January they'll open their books again, but the last time they opened their books apparently they were sold out in minutes. So not an easy knife to get a hold of. Very popular, very cool. We'll talk about why that is, but we'll also talk about some alternatives that you might consider, since there's a really good chance you can't get this, and maybe never will. Okay. Before we get to any of that, though, I want to say a huge thank you to Skylar. Give him a follow over on Instagram, TigerClaw1517. I'll put that handle down in the description box. He was willing to lend me this so I could share it with you guys, and I am really, really happy that he did, because this would just not be a knife that I would likely ever get a hold of. Not only would I not be able to, but it's a little small for my liking. So the kind of money this commands would not, I wouldn't be interested in paying that for it. So to be able to check it out is a huge, huge treat. And one of my favorite things about being a YouTuber is getting to check out some cool stuff. So huge thank you to Skylar. Now, one last thing along these lines, and I've got to make a further comment on this. So check out this artwork. Really, really interesting. And this artwork is communicating, okay, this is, sort of hieroglyphic type stuff. It's communicating Skylar's child's birthday, and he has tattoos that also serve the same function. So not only does this communicate his son's birthday, but it matches his tattoos. And I have to say that this is one of the coolest things about a custom knife, is the ability to make it exactly suited to you. That is so amazing. And one of the biggest reasons to buy a custom is you really have that opportunity to make something that is unique like no one else. And so I love that feature. I'm not a custom knife guy, but the one thing that really stands out to me about custom knives, and the one thing that I think makes them cool, is this possibility to make a knife that's suited just to you. And that is fantastic. And so I've got to say that as before we kind of get into it. Now, let's talk about why people love this thing so much. And really, I think there's a fairly simple explanation. This is a simple thing done very well. All right, there's nothing flashy here. There's nothing crazy. There are a couple of really cool features that we're going to touch on, but those features even are incorporated in a way that doesn't, go over the top, that are, fairly minimalist, and that's great. By the way, while I'm talking about some of the features here, this knife is one that's, customizable to a certain degree. You can change the finishes. We've got a heavy stonewash here, but you can do like hand rubbed satin. You can do different anodizing on the titanium. And so Skylar went with the stonewash throughout, especially so that this really, really cool pattern would stand out. And I think that's fantastic. But just know that there are options available to you if you could ever get your hands on one anyway. All right. Size and weight on this is pretty nice. A little small for me, but very, very appealing to a broad swath of the EDC world. 7 inches overall, 3 inches on the blade, about 3 inches of cutting edge, about 4 inches of handle. It's like 3 15/16, 4 inches of grip area. And you can see how the grip area extends here onto the blade, which gives you a little more real estate. And so what's cool about this is, for a small knife, it doesn't feel small. Like there's no issue in terms of having enough room for your hand here, which I do really, really like. I can easily get 4 fingers on here and actually feel like I have a lot of room. So that, I think, is pretty cool. And that's, a lot of people like Spyderco's for that same reason, sort of that Spidernomics approach. Very light. Did I say 2.9 ounces? If I didn't, it's 2.9 ounces. It feels great in hand. And, it does, I like that strategy of sharing some of the blade. And of course, when you're carrying this in pocket, it carries very, very well. You really don't even know you've got it, which is great. Blade. Let's take a look at this blade. Okay, we've got a very thin, slicey blade here, full flat grind. And in fact, that grind continues right up to the spine. So if you measure, so look right here at the plunge grind, you can see that there's even a little ledge there. So the full blade itself is ground a little thinner than the stock, and that stock is going to be around 3 millimeters or 123 thousandths. Behind the edge, it's only 14 thousandths, so crazy thin blade here. Gonna slice like a demon, and I have done a little bit of light cutting with it, but as is always the case when I'm borrowing somebody else's knives, I do baby them a little. All right, the blade steel on this is, now this is interesting. So they call it Z-finite, okay, Z-finite. You may know this steel as LC200N, which is a little more common, but very, very cool steel, completely unable to rust, which is great. And the nice thing about LC200N is that unlike some of the previous generations of unrustable steel, this actually holds an edge pretty stinking well, which is really, really cool. And I would call this a super steel, not because, right, because it's going to max out in one area. So, right, most of the time super steels max out in terms of edge retention. This maxes out in terms of corrosion resistance, which I think is really, really cool. And fantastic if this is a knife you're going to have in your pocket all the time when you're sweating and running and doing whatever else you may do that can rust your knife. All right. By the way, this blade has this, well, I should point out, very attractive heavy stonewash. It's also available in, I think, a grinder satin or a hand rub satin. I could be wrong on, I know there's hand rub satin, maybe the grinder satin is not a thing, but really, really nicely done. And of course, we've got that big opening hole, which is nicely chamfered. And I got to say, everything feels really, really nice. All right, a little bit of jimping here that is just sharp enough to offer some extra traction, and the overall knife is pretty nice. It achieves most of its retention just through the shape of the handle rather than having a whole lot of heavy texturing. We'll get to that later on under ergonomics. Now the hole in the blade does kind of bring us to the action, which let me just demonstrate for you. There's the lock bar, easily accessible. Will it drop shut? Oh yes, it definitely will. So that, I have to say, is very, very impressive. I can thumb roll it. I think you could thumb flick this. Skylar probably can with a bit of practice. There you go. But it's designed to spidey flick, and it does that exceptionally well. The lock bar is very accessible. The lock bar tension is set really, really nicely. And the drop shut is really, really impressive because it's hard to get a blade that's this light to drop shut that way. So I've got to give a lot of credit. Everything about this action, lockup, deployment, the feel of everything that you have to touch with your hands, whether it be the lock bar or the opening hole or whatever the case may be, it just feels finished and complete and clean and precise. So very, very appropriate action, okay, for keeping with the kind of knife that this is. And that's, again, one of the things you're paying for with a higher end knife is that attention to detail. All right. And we'll talk about some alternatives to this, but none of the alternatives are going to be quite as special, but they can fill a similar role. So I just wanted to clarify that from the beginning. Notice the proprietary pivot here, which is somewhat proprietary, but nothing crazy. You'll just need a spanner to open that. And I didn't look into too much of what Oz Machine Company says about taking this knife apart, but it looks pretty simple. It should be a pretty easy takedown. And so I would imagine it's okay, but don't quote me on that. So action is very good, very enjoyable. It's easy to spidey flick. It's a really, really fidget friendly knife, very smooth, very, very comfortable. Again, very, very well done all around. The one thing that I want to show you, because it really is unique, is the lock interface. Now it's going to be a little tough to get you to give you a look at this, but I think, oh, hold on, let's try that in Firefly. There we go. Think you'll be able to see it if I get just right. There you go. So look at the tip of my thumbnail, and in there you can see two balls. Those are ceramic balls, and so it's a ceramic interface with the blade tang. But I also want to notice, and at some point in the opening path, you can sort of see, okay, there we go. So look right in there now. In the blade, there are two detent holes you can see there. And so kind of interesting, both of those detent balls drop into the two holes in the blade. And I suppose that's necessary because otherwise it wouldn't work, right? If you just had one, the other one would hold it out and you'd get zero detent. So you'd have to do it this way, but it must have taken a lot of tweaking to get this just right. And it really is just right. So big props to Oz Machine Company. Number one, for using that method. The ceramic detent ball, I think, is fantastic. And for being able to just dial in that detent even with two detent holes, which is going to be a bit of a task. Very, very cool feature. And I also like the fact that sort of spreads that force out over a larger area. Ceramic's going to be harder than steel. And so could you potentially wear on that steel tang a little bit? Maybe. Not likely, and certainly would take a long time, but using two is really unique and pretty interesting. All right, let's move on now to ergonomics and construction of this handle. So pretty plain handle here, just a couple of slabs of titanium, backspacer, milled pocket clip, which by the way is really, really well done. And if you look internally, I guess I'm gonna need that flashlight again. I shouldn't have put it away. 1 second there, guys. So I think I can show you. There you go. Very, very heavily milled out, and both the show side and the lock side have some milling to cut down on the weight, which is really nicely done. Again, this is one of those knives where you pick it up and you're like, whoa, that feels way lighter than I think it should. Really nice feature, and they've heavily milled that out to save weight, which I definitely appreciate. And it kind of fits, again, why is this so popular? Well, it's really on trend, right? The Benchmade bug out and a few others have sort of pushed this, like, let's make EDC knives as unnoticeable in pocket as we can. And this certainly fits that aesthetic. All right. So we've talked about handle construction. I mentioned backspacer here, heavily milled out, really nicely chamfered all the way around so that it feels quite comfortable in hand. Proprietary pivot, torque screws back here in the backspacer. Okay. Notice how the clip is going to be attached internally. You can sort of see that right there. You can see the corner of that screw. So that's how it's made. I've already commented a couple of times, but in a saber grip, this feels so right. It really does feel like it was just meant for a human hand. And so the ergonomics are absolutely a win. Now, a hammer grip is maybe not quite as nice. Reverse grip, again, probably not. But for a saber grip, the way you're going to most of the time be using this, or even sort of an index finger type of grip, this is really, really good. All right. So no complaints about ergonomics whatsoever, especially for a knife that's this size and this thin. I do want at this point to bring in some comparisons. So what am I thinking of for comparisons? Well, knives with good ergonomics that are very slim, very lightweight, really well suited to EDC. And I think there are a few offerings that we could point out here. The first one that springs to mind more than any other, and in fact, the first time I looked at this knife, I kind of thought of the cold steel American Lawman. Now, the American Lawman is bigger. You can see that pretty obviously. There used to be a mini, maybe they'll bring it back, but even if they don't, the American Lawman is so close in terms of, you know, the way it feels, the ease of carry. You do have the option to choke back on the Lawman. You don't have to choke up here, which is going to be a significant difference. The blade is actually not that much bigger. Okay, so I think that's a pretty close comparison and going to be available at a much more budget-friendly price point. Another knife that comes to mind, in fact, a couple of Spydercos, the first one is the Mannix for the same reason. Notice how, you know, we've got sort of a similar idea here that we share the blade, fairly short, fairly comfortable in hand. And of course, if you went with a Mannix lightweight or something like that, it would even be more pronounced. Sorry, I was using this the last few days on a construction site, so it's all kind of messed up. But again, very comfortable knife, similar in its philosophy, okay? Very sharp, slicey blade with a very comfortable, easy to carry handle that is that feels really, really good in a saber grip style of hold, okay? Again, quite a bit cheaper. Now, Probably the Para 3 would be more in keeping with this, but I don't have a Para 3. In fact, I'm not interested in having one, but the Para 2 gets the point across. Okay, you've got a small, very comfortable knife in hand that, with about 3 inches of blade length. Now, what about the high end? Well, the Inkosi is not going to work, but if you went with a small, it would again be something very satisfying, fairly easy to get a hold of, right? A 31 would be, or a 21 or a 31 in the small is going to be, a similar idea, something very well made, very easy to carry, very satisfying from a sort of quality point of view, small batch, fairly hard to get. And you can, of course, this is just a plain Jane Inkosi, but you can get them customized to your liking. Another knife that really comes to mind is the XM18, not this one, but the small. Right, the 3-inch XM18 is going to again be a similar idea in terms of ergonomics. It's going to give you that option to choke up, use a saber grip, get your finger up here on the blade, and be able to have a fairly small, not super noticeable knife, very high end, very well made, and it's going to be much easier to get your hands on than something like this. Finally, the thing that I've committed to is to bring the Formax in, even if it's just briefly, in every video. So here's the Formax. You can see that they're not in the same ballpark at all. However, it does share the idea of being, whoops, look, the knife's too big for my brain. I can't handle it. There we go. It does share that ability to choke up, and it does share the fact that it's a huge aesthetic win, and you can sort of see the commonalities between this and more of the American Lawman, which is of course a Demco design. Overall, this is a beautifully made knife, totally dialed in on a number of fronts, and I totally get why this is so sought after. Oz Machine Company is building something great. Now, it's small batch and it's expensive, so because of that, by nature, then it's not going to be for everyone, but it is going to be for anyone who wants something special, who wants something that's extremely well done, and something that, while being high end and unique and interesting, they can still practically use and carry. So there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on the Oz Machine Company Roosevelt. What a great little knife. Totally beautiful design, and just exceptionally well done. Thank you again, Skylar, for letting me check out this knife, which is very personal to you, and just to let me appreciate it and to share something like this, which is, yes, a very functional tool, but also very much a piece of artwork as well. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, look, you won't find this over at my channel sponsors, but if you want to check out Southern Edge Knife Works or White Mountain Knives, you'll probably find some of the other recommendations I gave you there, and perhaps one of those will suit your needs and hold you over while you're waiting to get your hands on one of these, which could be quite a wait. We'll talk to you soon.